Well, I'm so excited to be here, and first would like to thank Adam Brown and ImpediMed for making sure I got here safely. I had to sign a disclosure that I wasn't going to surf or bungee jump or do anything reckless before the talk. Wait till tomorrow. Just kidding. So I'm really excited to be here tonight. Let me just check with our camera guy. Do we need the lighting, or are we good? Okay. All right. We don't need the special lighting. So I'm here tonight to really tell you about a personal story. And it's one that has helped me guide my other patients and understand how important this technology is for us to use. I do have a lot of disclosures, and a lot of times I used to sit and say, wow, they're getting paid by all these companies. This is actually a good thing. I started a consulting company a year ago and left the safety of my hospital because there are too many messages that aren't getting out because we don't have speakers going around and traveling and talking about technology and how we can innovate. And a lot of these companies here have been leaders and innovators in many areas of lymphedema care and cancer rehab. We have a lot of questions to answer tonight. You don't actually have to read, I'm not going to read all of these, but questions are what make our brain work. When we have a question to answer, then we're hungry for the knowledge. And our patients always have a lot of questions, don't they? They come into us, and sometimes there are more questions and we don't have answers, and we sometimes feel frustrated, but we shouldn't be scared by that if we don't have all the answers. We can just say, that's great, it's a good question. And when I'm teaching, I think that's really important. But one of the highlights is I really want to talk about how we create this paradigm shift in what we're doing, and we need to do it sooner than later. Because really lives are at risk if we don't start using data, and we have a lot of it out there. What does my experience doing bridge climb, and I could get in trouble for this, apparently you're supposed to get permission to use that word, but what does it have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, when I signed up to come here with Adam, I also signed up for bridge climb, not really knowing what I was in for, but knowing that I'm incredibly afraid of steps that are open and heights. And I'm like thinking, what was I thinking about doing? So we'll talk more about that. I'd like to start off by a concept that we're going to bring out through the whole night. I love TED Talks, like who doesn't, right? How many of you actually watch TED Talks? Yeah, they're just wonderful and get a lot of data really quick and concise. I'm not going to be that concise tonight because I've got an hour and then a break and then another hour. But Thomas Getz, if anyone knows who he is, he actually worked at Wired. Wired is a magazine. It's a tech magazine. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah, the AV guy does. Thank you. Yes, someone in the room. He's my plant. So he talked about why so many areas of medicine don't work, and it's because of how we're going about it. And if you don't have personalized data, then someone can't find the relevance in what's going on. They can't make choices, and they can't go into action. We have to create this feedback loop, and this is based on a lot of the social science work. And again, I should have treats and gifts to give you. Does anyone know who Albert Bandura was? Oh my, okay. So he's one of the foremost social scientists, psychologists in the 20th century. Just did amazing seminal work on self-efficacy and whatnot. So he's someone else you can check out. But let's talk about a mission statement. Everyone should have one, right? If you don't, you're going to write one after tonight. ImpediMed has one. I found theirs, and I like it was backed by some water. I didn't even have to add that in. But they want to try to improve patients' life by providing solutions that will allow a deeper understanding of the human body and the importance of fluid status and body composition in all living things. So we're going to start with humans, but pretty soon we'll have sozo for dogs. I don't know, maybe. So this is a great mission because you can see all the action words in there and what they want to do. I found this mission statement in a cancer survivorship garden. They had all these tiles that people could walk around. This was on the ground. And I thought this was wonderful. Make a commitment to do everything you can to fight this disease. How many of our patients, wouldn't have this up on their wall, right? When they're diagnosed with cancer, all of a sudden they've got this new mission in life because there's not another diagnosis out there that when people hear that causes the fright that the word cancer causes, right? Our patients get heart disease and you don't say, oh my God, did you hear? Jane got heart disease. Hush in the room. But when you hear cancer, or this happens in your own family, it all of a sudden creates pause and we think cancer, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. The good news is a lot of people are surviving, and that brings a new problem that we have now. But what does this mean to you personally? What is your mission statement? Mine does not look like a nice written statement. This is mine. I'm a very visual person. I have an iPad Pro and I love to draw and doodle. So there are a bunch of concepts here tonight that we're going to go through and really talk about. But the thing I didn't have Dr. Boyages talk about was I was an English major undergrad. So I don't come from the sciences organically. I'm the artist, right? So we need a story to do something remarkable. Stories are how human beings have communicated through years. How often do we use stories to relate to our patients or to have our patients help learn something? When you're trying to teach them bandaging, if you start using anatomical terms and directions, that doesn't work too well, does it? But sometimes you can create little stories about how to go around the wrist with the finger wraps or something, and they start to understand. So we need stories. And adoption of technology is not really a straight arrow like I'm showing you here. We think it is, but it's not. The patient experience is not a straight arrow. That's why that little doodle is the patient with this very circuitous route. And all of us in the top, that blue arrow, we're bringing our own personal, unique experiences into the equation. And that's going to include the knowledge and the research, but it's actually the social connections that drive and create the norms that we utilize throughout our careers. So then we also have clinical practice guidelines, little orange arrow. And there was a wonderful editorial that I'm going to keep talking about by the editor-in-chief of in U.S. Physical Therapy Journal, Alan Jetty, and it's a really wonderful talk about the difference between ignorance and ineptitude, and we'll talk more about that. But he talks about these lenses that we have to go through when we're trying to overcome ignorance and ineptitude, and they have to do with perceptions, personalities, and contextual factors. And there's actually more social science about this where they talk about this complexity theory, and this all happens. It's not in a clean little room where this happens. It's a messy process. There are a lot of people involved in this. And we really have to start to think this way to enact change. So here's my story. This is some personalized data. 2012, we had a big hurricane in the US, Hurricane Sandy. My dad's house got destroyed. My mom's house got flooded. Even though she was on a river, it backed up the rivers. It was pretty traumatic for my family. My dad then got sick because of the house being contaminated. Then ultimately he goes on to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and I'm dealing with this. And then my brother dies, then my dad dies, and I'm still running a clinic 60 to 80 hours a week. I'm not exercising anymore, and I'm going through menopause, okay? So what fun, all of this at the same time. We're doing a training at KU. That's what the test 3 KU, that was my unique identifier that day. And you can see it was August 14th, 2017. It wasn't that long ago. And no one else would lay down on the table to get tested. There was a whole room of women. Everyone's like, I'm not going first. You do that. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I go and weigh myself. That was the first fright, okay? So sorry, I didn't, thank God you guys don't know pounds because you won't know how much that actually is. I think it's around 77 kilos, something like that. Adam, you can do a little math for me. So there I am, and I see this BMI, it's over 30. You all know what that means. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like clinically obese at this point. And I've got a body fat of 35%. So this is pretty bad. So there I am on any chart that you can find, American College of Exercise, all the I'm class 1 obesity at this point, and I've always thought of myself as like a little, fire plug. I've always been very strong. I can pick someone up over my shoulders, you name it. But here I am, I'm obese, and I'm like, wow, I've got to do something about this. So having that information made me want to do something. Now I'm going to step back a little because in 2016, this was actually a picture I used in a poster presentation that got this whole thing started. And at that point, it wasn't quite so bad. But again, the stress was still real and a lot was going on. And when I looked at those two things, I said, wow, in the course of a year, my body had transformed. It was not a good transformation, not the kind we're looking for. And if we had just used BMI to really guide me, we would have made mistakes. And I feel very strongly about this. This is why we need this technology. So my fallback position has always been obesity paradox. Yes, okay, I'm the roly-poly one who can get out there and, pace my friends who look like models through half marathons. And my method of training used to be, okay, the marathon's in 6 weeks. I'm going to run a mile this week so I make sure I don't have a heart attack. Next week I'll run 3 miles. And then the next week I run 6. So I trained for a half marathon running 10 miles and paced my friend through a 10-minute mile pace. So whatever that is in metric. Sorry, I do run 10Ks, but the half marathon mixes me all up. So the thing is, I've always thought I'm one of those really fit and always slightly overweight people, have great muscle mass. And that's good because we know with some health conditions, that's actually a good place to go into with certain cancers. Because certain cancers, if you go in underweight, that's not a good sign. So what I started to find with my research, with my database using the SFB7, which is the research model of your U400, is that I was finding a lot of patients who were thin and they were obese and they had very high body fats. And this really scared me because what did that mean for their lymphedema risk? What did that mean for their survivorship? What did that mean for how they tolerated all the treatments? So then I looked a little bit more into some of the really big data. Okay, this is a study about 10,000, close to 11,000 postmenopausal women. That's me now, right? I see myself in that category. Using DEXA scan, they basically said, you know what, positive associations. If you're overweight, your chances of getting breast cancer are higher. And then they looked at some anthropomorphic measurements and said the same thing, yeah. So now I'm starting to get worried because in the US, there are going to be 1.6 million new cases of cancer this coming year. We're going to have close to 600,000 people die. We have 14.5 million survivors. I mean, these numbers are huge. When we start to look at these, I looked up some Australian numbers too. The bottom of that slide, though, shows the real issue is globally, we are going to see an explosion of cancer in some of the highest populated areas that we have that don't have the same healthcare systems that we have. Now, numbers don't mean anything unless you put it into perspective. I heard you have a big cricket stadium here. Well, we have a stadium like that in my home state of Pennsylvania. Penn State football, it's a big football team, holds 106,000 people in it. So when I started to calculate how many new cancer survivors that really meant and having that visual look of the stadium being packed when we won that game, 15.8 of those stadiums would be filled with people. Those are the people that are going to get cancer this year. And that gives me chills. I actually have goosebumps thinking about that, and you should too. These numbers are astronomical. And yours are lower, but they're still kind of the same proportionality for your population. 136 of these stadiums would be filled with the cancer survivors alone. These numbers, again, are just tremendous. When I show people this, they're like, wow, I never really looked at it this way. Because how do we look at our cancer survivors? One at a time, right? They come on, we don't have groups coming in usually, oh, look, 10 women just showed up. Oh, 100,000 women just showed up. Whoops, get in a line, right? No, they come one at a time. So we lose the perspective of what we're really dealing with. Here's the Australian numbers. Thank you, Dr. Google. Just pulled those off. Sorry, I forgot to give credit. It was late and I wanted to drop this in. But, 138,000 people are going to be diagnosed this year. Fairly roughly split, men a little bit more than women. Almost 50,000 people are going to die from this disease in your country. And you have upwards of 400,000 survivors. These are still big numbers. And yours is spread out over a country the size of my country. So you have all kinds of different issues with getting to people. So bottom line is I'm a statistic. I'm a possible statistic. And, this hits home today. I called home and my mother-in-law just got diagnosed with breast cancer. They didn't want to tell me before I left, right? Because they didn't want me to worry about it. I'm like, you guys, this is what I do for a living. You should have said something. But, this is real. This can happen. So Dilbert, do you guys have Dilbert here? Do you know who I'm talking about? I love Dilbert. So, this slide sums it up. We have all these big numbers that we can throw at people and say, you're a possible statistic, and you've got to worry about this, you've got to worry about that, and that fear. And, here he has this big data test that he has, and everyone just, chooses the risky lifestyle nonetheless, and half of them die, and he predicted it, right? So I kind of love Dilbert because, this is how humans work. We don't make good choices, do we? If we made good choices, we wouldn't have all the diseases that we have, or at least people wouldn't have to deal with them in some of the ways. Look at the diabetes epidemic. We've done a great job managing that, haven't we? And, that's actually a pretty manageable disease if you can get people to do what they're supposed to do. So back to the TED Talk. You've got to watch this one too. It was from 2010, TED Med, but it's really still a very relevant talk. The thing with this whole feedback loop and some of the research they did, and this was research done in the dental field. These dentists in Connecticut had this captive audience, and they tried to figure out would they respond to fear by telling them their teeth were going to fall out of their head and they wouldn't be able to chew and ever eat again, and they'd have to wear dentures, or would they respond to self-efficacy of being told that there's something you can do about this. You can brush your teeth, you can floss, and you will actually have some control of whether your teeth fall out of your head. And they found that the group that responded best and did well were the ones with self-efficacy. And this was the whole concept that Bandura's work was based on. Fear basically doesn't work. And he, in this TED Talk, talks about this great image that one of the diabetes associations tried to do of an ambulance crashing through someone's house, and it said, "Hank, is your A1C under control?" And he said his kid looks, he's like, "Daddy, why is there an ambulance in their living room?" He's like, "I don't know, because it doesn't work. Crashing an ambulance into someone's house doesn't, incite the fear that they think it's going to incite to have them change behavior." So believing that you can do something is what does it. So this is where my, sorry, no trademark here, bridge climb comes into play. I had this fear, but from the moment I walked in the room, they instilled confidence. From the moment we were there, they made personal connections at every juncture. You got introduced to every team member who you came across, and they got introduced to you. These are groups of 14 people, and they introduced each person. We went around in a circle, had to say where we're from, why we're here. You see where I'm going with this? It was beautiful work. We should be doing this in healthcare. They broke it down in parts so we understood each section of the climb, because they were really 3 different sections. There was this part going horizontal, which I just hated because it was really scary. Then these ladders going up, and then you had the arch, and that part wasn't bad. That was the best part. They told a story about how the bridge was built, and during that story, this guide, she wove everything in there from what we had told her. She's like, "Yeah, so-and-so's birthday is today. Isn't this great to be up on the bridge on your birthday? And imagine all this." And she brought in statistics and everything. It totally took your mind off that you were on top of this bridge like a fool, and you paid a lot of money to do it, and I never would have done something like that. But it was sort of this wonderful, relevancy of the stories and why we were there, and they drove those social connections. So I knew all about the woman in front of me who works for Diners Club, and we're going to be like best friends now, and the couple behind us who had bought the trip for their kids. The kids didn't want to go, the ungrateful teenagers, and they were hysterical talking about their kids and how glad they were now that they were up on this. And she was scared to death too. And so the two of us were like best friends. We just did it. We'd like high five every time we got through a tough section. And I never knew these people, right? It was just wonderful. So they got someone like myself who had this incredible fear. And what one of our patients doesn't have fear? And their fear is pretty real. Fear of heights is actually it's somewhat ingrained into our DNA, but it's also something that we can control. I can't control if I get cancer, right? I've got cancer and I've got to deal with that fear every day. So I thought it was amazing how they got me to spring into action and actually climb up this bridge. And I think the relevancy is, how do we do that with our patients? There I am, we did it. Woo, that is, if you haven't done it, even if you live here, really, go do this. It's just extraordinary. So here's I tried to cut the same pose that I was doing for the talk. And this was the image that I used in my poster when I first ran some of my data back in 2016. And you kind of see what's happening with me. I wasn't in great shape in 2016. 2017 got even worse. But 2018, here's where I'm at now. So I'm down from my 74, I went from 74.8 up to 77. I'm down to 70.7 kilos. I perhaps may have gained a kilo since I've been here, despite all the walking. But it's really important. I think without the data, I couldn't really tell what was happening, because my body's also changing. I'm going through menopause, and your body feels different. All of you who haven't gone through it yet, I never believed it, and wow, am I sold on the fact that things are really changing. And so I'm getting some positive response here, so someone knows what I'm talking about. So here it is with what I'm doing with my Sozo. Now, again, these are just sticky notes, so I can't print out reports yet in the US. But I'm just trying to show you a couple of things I'm looking at. The numbers that kind of drive me are, I'm looking at my fat-free mass because I don't want that to drop too much, okay? I'm looking to see that fat percentage start to change, and then I want to actually see how many pounds of fat I'm dealing with there, and then my weight. So I kind of look at those, and you'll see here, this one, the fat-free mass may not change that much, but the fat percentage, here it is a couple weeks later, fat percentage is coming down, but I've actually lost almost 2.3 pounds of fat. So I'm losing the right weight, and this is really important. And this becomes critically important with our patients who don't have the advantage of me not having another health problem. You know, I'm just overweight, but I'm not sick. I have normal bone density and everything else, and my patients don't. And they're fighting other things that I'm not dealing with. So, you know, I have a little cushion. So back to this. We're going to talk now about these lenses that we have to go through that Jetty talked about. And remember, they're perceptions, personalities. Who has not dealt with that in healthcare, right? I mean, these are things Louise and I were talking about earlier today, that these are often what can make or break what's happening in facilities. But we're going to talk about these. And this was from Jetty's, and I have the citation there. Please look this up. It's a really wonderful editorial that he wrote. And I think it's so relevant to what we're doing. Ignorance, we need to understand, is a limited understanding of the relevant physical laws and conditions given to any circumstance. But ineptitude is when the knowledge exists and we don't take advantage to apply it correctly in a particular circumstance. And probably one of the best ways we can look at that is through hand hygiene. Why is hand hygiene still a problem in modern society? But it is. I found some great stuff about Australia here. So this is a great, you know, ignorance versus ineptitude. There were studies done here in Australia not too long ago that showed that less than a third of the teaching hospitals were meeting the national target of at least washing your hands 70% of the times before you touch patients. Wow. And we wonder why infections are still killing people in hospitals. You know, Philippa, where are you? Remember I went and washed your hand. Oh, she's checking someone in. But when I was first meeting her, my hand was soiled, and instead of doing the socially correct thing and just sticking my hand out and washing, I said, I can't shake your hand right now. How many of you do that? How many of you have just wiped your nose or sneezed on your hand and refused to shake someone's hand when you know darn well you're just giving them a whole load of wonderful little, here, nice to meet you, you know, and you're like, okay, you know, start with maybe the arm bump or the fist bump. We've started doing that in some hospitals. They kind of forbid handshaking. It's a social construct we're so used to, and you have no idea where someone's hands have been, you know, so it's that hand washing. So, you know, this is a perfect example and a very relevant one, unfortunately still relevant, that hand hygiene, again, one of the most important ways, but we're just not doing it. And, you know, in the restaurant business, because I'm a foodie, gastritis and GI issues from healthcare workers not washing their hands are responsible for an estimated 70 to 80% of foodborne illnesses. And that is just disgusting, right? And it's how are we still having this happen in the 21st century? But that's ignorance versus ineptitude. Everyone knows they should wash their hands now, except maybe a few places in the world maybe still haven't gotten that news bulletin. But pretty much we know this. And if doctors aren't doing it and we're not doing it, what are the masses that don't know as much as we know? Those little culture dishes were the one way that they did kind of get the doctors and nurses to change was they showed them typical cultures of things like their colleague's hand, the phone at the nurse's station, the cell phone that you're carrying around, the stethoscope. It's not pretty. So that leads us to another one of my 5 million social theories for the night. Has anyone heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? It won the Nobel Prize. Oh, good. Yes, someone in the room knows about this. The 2000 Nobel Prize in Psychology was Dunning and Kruger won this, and it's really wonderful because it talks about when people first learn something new, they have a high level of confidence, right? How many of you have kids? I don't have kids. I don't like them, but no. But kids, right? You show them something new. Mom, I've got that. Right? They know the first time they've learned how to do something, and they're already an expert. It's amazing. So the problem is, how many of us who are experts now have gone through that imposter syndrome? Like, I'm standing up here, they're going to think I don't know a thing about this. Because, you know, the more we learn that, oh my gosh, there's so much I still don't know. And, you know, you become that autodidact, always looking things up, always wanting to learn more and more and more information. So you get that dip. Who hasn't had that, right? Well, a lot of our patients haven't because, again, we know from like some of the lymphedema stuff, right? You show someone bandaging the first time, they're like, oh, I've got this, no problem. Okay, go on back, come on back, show me how you did. And you look back and it's just, and you laugh at them in a very jovial and kind way and say, all right, let's go over this again. You'll get this sooner or later. One of the big problems with that early confidence is that people who lack the skill to do something also lack that kind of knowledge of how to learn how to do it. And then sometimes, because they can't develop that skill, they'll fall back on things that just think they make sense to them, right? How many of you have had some of your lymphedema patients do some pretty strange things to stop their swelling, right? I had a lady who put a tourniquet effect on because her hand was swelling. She thought, well, that'll keep it from spreading up the arm. When the first belt didn't work, she put a second belt on up here because she didn't want it to go to the rest of her body. Now, that's a pretty smart thought if you have no idea how circulation works, right? But she was thinking of something that would like spread on the skin. So we really have to assess the ignorant mind. And it could be our own, our colleagues, our patients, because it's not a spotless empty vessel, as the slide says, and you can read that. There is a lot of stuff that's often in there. And the thing with tissue analysis that I've found is when you talk to patients about either losing or gaining weight or having to adjust some things, boy, they tell you some very interesting things of how they do it. And when you see some of the case studies later on, you're going to see patients who, if they went to their old ways of doing things, could do things that would only make the problem worse. So we really have to question, ask your patients, well, so what do you think helps you? And a lot of times, I try to really find out how they're thinking about what they're doing, because a lot of times it just makes no sense and it's uninformed. So, all right, who's heard of the diffusion of innovation? Please, someone. Okay, yeah, a little. All right, so how many people have a smartphone? All right, a lot of you. How many people were the first person in your cohort to have a smartphone? Oh boy, second person. Oh boy, all right, so I think I'm working with a bunch of maybe third person, right? So, okay, so there's not many innovators here in the social. I was the first one to have that iPad Pro. Every new tech piece that comes out, I can't believe I don't have an iPhone 10 yet. It's only because my subscription ends like the last day I'm here, so I'll get it as soon as I get home. But we have to understand that this Rogers innovation curve, this innovation diffusion thing started back in the agriculture field, actually, and it was trying to get farmers to use different techniques that they could use. And it's been used in many areas of business. The business folks in the back, I know they've heard of this. They're just being shy and not raising their hands. But all the tech companies think about this. They want people to use their technology. And so how do you get that? How do you get up that steep curve from the beginning? So this is who the people are, though. The innovators are people creating and pulling the change. Early adopters are opinion leaders who test out new ideas. Companies just hope to get to that early majority. And right now, what I can tell you is worldwide, and even here, if you're using LDAX right now, you're still in that innovator/early adopter phase. That's where we're still at with using this technology. Yeah, if you look in the United States, what's happening with this, anyone who has it is practically an innovator still. It's just not been widely disseminated like it has here for a host of reasons. So we really have to look in the fact that we've been real laggards with getting technology into medicine in some areas where it could really make a difference. And we have to remember, though, that medicine is so complicated, and so this diffusion curve doesn't always work as cleanly in the medical field. We're dealing with a lot of moving parts. It's also important to understand that we can often have a pro-innovation bias for a lot of different reasons, and sometimes they're not the best reasons. They could be more that, hey, these companies, they develop something, now they've got to make a lot of money, so how are they going to get their return on investment, right? It's not always about that, but sometimes some technologies have. Not every technology that we've introduced has worked. I've been a believer of this technology for a long time, and I've been putting, a lot of energy and effort in my clinical practice to making sure this technology works because I've seen the benefits of it. And so, I don't feel like I have a pro-innovation bias on this, but we always have to check in on our potential biases, right? That's why you saw my disclosures in the beginning. The way we process information is also something that really hinders this. It gets very complicated. Again, that'll be, the lecture after the lecture. But if we don't create these feedback loops, basically, we're not going to do well with this. And that's why that first TED Talk. So healthcare is not a science problem, it's an information problem. And I'm here to tell you that's really what it is. We have so much science, don't we? And don't you sometimes sit there and say, why aren't we using this? You know, think of ICG green. Everyone should be getting tested with that before their surgery. We would have such a better idea of what's going on with folks. And I've been a wishful early adopter of the ICG green. I just can't get anyone to do it at my former hospital. I was begging them to do it. Please start doing this. This stuff is brilliant, right? It should be point of care. It should be everywhere. There shouldn't be a breast center that doesn't have it, or anyone at risk for lymphedema, or anyone diagnosed with lymphedema. I want to see where their lymph flow is, right? But it's not. So it's really not a science problem. We have the science. It's an information, it's a delivery problem with getting that information to the right people who have the money. So Jetty's, back to this editorial about the overcoming of the ignorance and ineptitude in the 21st century. He really said, despite all these things we have, the evidence-based practice and all the things that we have, we're still not implementing these. And even sometimes when we get it in one location, we have a really hard time disseminating it. And so this is the task that we're up to. This is why we're talking about all these theories and everything right now. Because if you don't understand them, you'll have no idea why it's not working and why you can't get things done in your community. So, getting this to happen, it's unpredictable, it's highly variable, but the thing we know is that we've got to accelerate it. And that's what I'm here for. I just want to be the accelerant. I was trying to find a good analogy for that, and they were all like about arson and stuff. I thought, this is not good. I can't be burning things down. It's not what I'm trying to get. But, I'm trying to do something that really gets that fire lit, though. And it's important. So I was looking to some of the research, I always do, trying to see what the funding trends were from our National Cancer Institute in the States, and in terms of priorities with physical activity. And this is staggeringly sad. In a 10-year period, this bottom number were the number of studies that our Cancer Institute funded about body composition. I mean, it's abysmal. It's, 4 in 2014. Wow, this is really sad. So I don't know what they're funding, but we need more studies. We have so much research and data about how beneficial physical activity is, and yet we're not really looking at it. So I did find this one nice little article that, you can find this here. It was in a nutrition journal, and that's where a lot of this information is. It's not in our PT journals, it's in nutrition journals and some of these crossover journals. But I really like this because it was the first good article I could find that talked about this concept of sarcopenic obesity that we're going to talk about. And it talked about benefits of exercise and what we need to do with diet. So what does sarcopenia mean? Anyone speak Greek in here? Oh, good. Okay, kremides. What did I just say?
No.
Good. All right. He really does speak Greek. That's my test phrase, just to make sure. So Greek sark means flesh, and penia means poverty. So really, it's poverty of the flesh. Okay, and that is kind of what it looks like too. And initially, this term sarcopenia was only describing age-related changes, but now they're starting to really look at it as something that can also happen in patients who have other disease processes like malignancy, rheumatological problems, and not just aging. It involves a host of factors that they don't fully understand, most of them having some aspect of inflammation, and it's a metabolic problem. It's not just simple. It can have to do with everything from tumor necrosing factors to cytokines. Again, that's the other lecture. But ultimately, there's a decrease in muscle protein breakdown, and protein synthesis gets impacted, and the water in the muscle cells doesn't stay where the water should stay. And this will become important when we talk about SOZO. So there's a lot of different definitions of it, but it does usually include a performance piece, and I saw some exercise physiologists in the room. And so we're talking about grip strength in men of under 26 kilograms, and in women of, I think it's like 17 or 18. That's pretty darn low. I have a guy that I'll show his info later. He can only pull about 18 kilos of force on a JMR dynamometer. His function's terrible. He can barely get up off the floor, and we don't really know what's wrong with him, but he's clearly in the throes of sarcopenia. Cachexia, on the other hand, is kakos, means bad, and hexes means condition, so literally a bad condition. And yes, I'd say if someone has cachexia, they are kind of in a bad condition. this affects, these numbers may be a couple years old. I would estimate it's probably even another million. It's 80% of advanced cancer patients have this problem. It actually leads to, they suspect, upwards of 40% of cancer deaths are a result of the cachexia and not actually of the cancer. We also see it in COPD. We see it very high in kidney disease. It is a high inflammatory state, so you're going to have a ton of cytokines and things going on. It involves metabolism, again, not fully understood. But they have these consensus statements. There's an international group that's really starting to spend some time and effort on this and developing a more robust definition so that clinicians will be able to identify these patients faster, because there are interventions that we're starting to look at. And the best part is there's actually a journal out there, right? You know you've made it in the medical world when you have a journal. And this one is a mouthful, but it's the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia, and Muscle. I wonder what they're talking about. But it's great. I believe this started over in Italy. Met a couple of the researchers. They really just impressive work they're doing. The bottom line is whether someone has cachexia or sarcopenia, the end result in terms of what happens to the skeletal muscle dysfunction is the same. So the root cause, we still should be identifying that, but what happens in the morbidity and the mortality associated with it all go down the same pathway. So all you need to do, again, is go into Google and to see all the articles that are popping up about this. And these are just a few. I mean, these are cool. Look at that, molecular pathophysiology and impact on exercise training. You gotta love that. That looks like an interesting article. I'm gonna start reading that, right? So this is what I do on a Friday night, go kind of search some of these things and read these articles. And that's how I educated myself on a lot of the things that I'm pulling out even here. Because guess what? You can't call someone up. Right? Hey, Louise, what's the latest on this, right? We don't know. There's not that much data out there yet. Even when I talk to my oncologist about this, they're like, yeah, we know, they're losing weight, they're sick. Well, that's it, bye. And that's the conversation. And that's really sad. So when we have a device now that we can do something with this, we need to, because one of the things, and this was a wonderful, Dr. Antonio Vigano, he's one of the groups that's doing this. He's in that group of that journal. And, he's saying we're losing so many patients because of this, and no one's basically doing anything about it. And we really need to sound the alarm, because one of the things that may be one of the most impactful things is actually exercise training. And so, this is amazing to think that what we can start to do is actually get people moving if we rely on those old ways of thinking, right? Someone's sick, what do we tell them to do? Or what do they think they should do? Rest. You're supposed to rest. Just lay down. Oh, you've been diagnosed with cancer. Sit on the couch and eat some Twinkies, right? Let's just bring you sugar and all this other great thing, and don't do another thing today. Gosh, you just had chemo today, but I'm feeling good. I want to go out for a walk. But you've had chemo. You need to rest. And so if we keep treating patients that way, they're going to die. Okay, they're going to die because we're not treating them the right way. They should have treadmills and bikes in the chemo suite. They really should. I'm convinced of that. So I wanted to try again to find some more of the studies out there to show you, and actually something did pop up in, Annals of Internal Medicine. I was glad to see that, talking about, if we're not using the right things, all-cause mortality, if we're not looking at the right way, we're going to have a hard time really seeing these true connections, because body composition, just weight, is what we need to look at. We can't just be relying on weight anymore. It doesn't work well. So we've got to use this technology that we have. So what is body mass again? We know what this is. It's not a true measure. It's an index. You're not actually learning anything about that person's body other than they may have some excess weight, or maybe they don't have enough weight, but you don't know what that weight is, okay? So given that it has so many problems, what can we start to say about the research? Basically, my thought is we just have to do all these studies over again, and we have to use body composition for them. If we really want to truly know what's going on. And how often have we seen that? Before they knew about triple-negative breast cancer, right? All the studies about chemo were looking really funny, weren't they? They're like, gee, why are these women still dying? They had all the same chemo. Oh, then we discovered triple-negative. So they went back and looked at all these studies, and they ran the data again. They said, oh, there we go. Because there's this other kind of cancer that we have. Of course it's not going to respond to that. We really have to go back and perhaps repeat some of these studies if we have some new data that we can drive, and that will be body composition tissue analysis. So in this particular, the Malmo diet, and this was a very large study that was done up in Malmö's in Sweden, and they basically said any direct measurement of body composition should be not only routine, but anything that's better than BMI should be used. I mean, this is a very vague statement, isn't it? But they're just saying, basically translating that is, BMI is so bad, why are we still using this? It's my interpretation. So this was another great slide from a talk Leslie Bernstein did from City of Hope, and basically just using BMI, they know that 14% of male cancers in the U.S. are attributed to obesity and 20% of female cancers. We better start studying this. This is a lot of people who are being affected by this. So now let's get into some actual people. That's me, and this was my lovely patient who, she looks pretty good there, doesn't she? The doctor sees her come in the room and is looking like, you're looking great, you look like you're really fit and blah, blah, blah. Her BMI is 21.63. She's, in that completely normal range. I, on the other hand, am just on that bubble of obesity, right? Here's the problem. We both have 31% body fat. So we're going to talk about this after the break. So when I saw that was when I started to do this poster presentation at the NLN, because I said, there is something wrong here. I'm perhaps missing patients who really have a high risk for lymphedema because they don't look like my patients who have a BMI over 30. And we know a BMI over 30 is a very strong predictor of lymphedema risk, don't we, right? That's been really shown in the literature. I don't think that's going to end. So I started looking at the other ways that body composition was perhaps affecting these patients, because this woman had a lot of side effects. She had neoadjuvant chemo. She did not tolerate it well, and you'll see later on she really wasn't very healthy. And so I found these other studies out there that are talking about all the other potential side effects that could be because we're not estimating people's dosing of their chemo correctly. And it's because we're using BMI or body surface area, which doesn't tell us what's in the package, so we don't really know what we're treating. And so they were finding that these patients were having these bad side effects. And it also happens with our very obese patients because of the metabolic effect of the adipocytes that are different than muscle. So with that, we don't have to read all these. The big problem is this is all across the board. I found studies about large cell lymphoma. Here's one about colon cancer. Bottom line is these patients, if they become sarcopenic, they have worse survival rates. This is not good. And who's using it? How many of us are using this in our daily practice right now? And how many of us are working with cancer patients? Seriously, put your hands up, right? Right, look around the room. Put your hands up high. Look around the room. How many of us are using this in our everyday practice? Wow, that's not good, is it, right? So we really need to change how we're thinking. And there are researchers looking at this, but they are the innovators right now. And we've got to speed this up. Went to the clinical nutrition literature again, found this really nice article about just the healthy aging population. And exercise physiologists in the room, right? You got a 90-year-old, you can make them stronger, can't you? Yeah, you can be as old as you can get, and you can still strengthen people. There's no reason not to, but they often need to adjust their diet too, and make sure they're getting adequate protein intake, or else their body doesn't have the building blocks that they need to get stronger. So the good news was, again, dietary protein intake, exercise are both things that really can impact age-related sarcopenia. Now, with cachexia, found this nice little article. I deleted the reference by accident. I can find it if you really want to know. The bottom line was they said we need multimodal treatment. We need nutritional support. We need aerobic and resistance training. Because remember, what does that aerobic and resistance training do? It manages the inflammation. And that is what slows this metabolic freight train that's going down the hill without any brakes. That's what slows it down. But you need to have the building blocks. So at this point, do we have sufficient information to make any recommendations regarding the approaches to reduce obesity and improve prognosis? And also, do we have enough evidence to start to treat sarcopenia? Do we have enough evidence to start to treat cachexia? I think we do, but here's the problem is how many of us are using more technology in things like our refrigerator. If you read the bottom of that slide, access requires a password, retina scan, fingerprint analysis, and DNA sample. It's the best refrigerator I ever owned. That's where we're living right now. We're using technology in all the wrong places. Because really, what do we need our refrigerator to do? Stay cold, keep the door closed, right? Keep the food cool. And yet we're using all this technology that patients, don't even think twice about. And yet they come in, and aren't they so amazed when they see one of our devices? Oh my gosh, you're gonna stand on a sozo? I saw a woman today, she was just enthralled with this. Like, really, it's not that big a deal, it's a little electrical current. And right, Adam? I'm sorry, it is a big deal. But they were just so excited to see that we're using technology, because in the lymphedema world, we're pretty low tech and until now with ICG green and things like that, right? We're talking cotton bandages and some foam and someone's hands that have been treating this condition for a long time. So really, it's time to start to get technology back into here. But I'm starving now. We're going to eat. So with that, we've got a break time. And last question and prize for tonight, what beach is this? Someone's good. Very good. Good eye. All right. So I believe we have some refreshments in the back. How are we doing on time? Good? Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going a little fast, but we'll have more time for the case studies. So I just get excited to be here. Thank you so much, and I'll see you back there.
Thank you. Let's take some questions.
I just get so excited. Yes, in the front row.
So, old-fashioned methods, skin calipers, any good for body composition? Can we?
Versus BMI, yeah. If that's all you've got, that's a start. Because you remember that one slide I showed that the people basically said, as long as you're not using BMI, you're doing something better, pinch an inch if you have to. Remember those old commercials? When you can just go up to your patient and you can still find, these large amount of fat stores. Before I even tested my one patient I'll show you about a little later, gentleman came in and I just took one look at him. I said, oh boy, I guessed his body fat within 1 percentage point just by doing some very gentle grasping of different points on his body that you would typically do with the calipers. I didn't need the calipers to know his body fat was quite high for a man his age. So yeah, until you get a sozo, rock on, yeah.
Any other questions? What percentage of body fat is ideal? What would you like to be?
So that's a good question. Here we have let's look at the slide about that. So an exercise physiologist in the room. I'm more than glad if you jump in here. I like these things to be somewhat interactive if possible. So if we use some of the standardized charts that are available and that we use in the U.S., a lot of people use this. Let's see, just get this in here. It'll be hooked up in a moment. There we go. Yeah. So this is the American Council of Exercise shows that these are sort of you've got your essential fat, okay, and I'll be showing these later when I show the other slides just to keep your framework. But, women have a 10 to 13% essential fat. We're watching the Olympics right now, and even though it's Winter Olympics, they're probably not quite like the Summer Olympics. But you see in the Summer Olympics, a lot of those women athletes, they stop having their period. A lot of biological changes occur when their body fat drops so low. And, these don't potentially have good effects long term for them because they're supposed to have more fat on their body. For men, it's much lower. When we used to test wrestlers, and again, some of the exercise physio people may do some of this, but in high school wrestling, the coaches would not let the young boys go below 5%. It was like a state law or something in the one area because they didn't want these kids to be damaging their bodies. And it was, so they were testing the kids to make sure that they had that. So I think I like their category because it kind of talks about the lean person versus, the very lean versus the normal. So, normal really for women is 26 to 31%. We're supposed to have some body fat on our body. And for men, though, that should be 18 to 22. So when I start to see men, who are much in the 27% and things like that, like my one guy, I get worried because there's something going on.
So it's sort of 20% for men and 30% for women, almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think,
sort of way of remembering.
men again, normal should be that low, high teens, low 20s. And for women, though, it is much higher.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, another way to look at it in some of the charts talk about like athletes, the fit person, the average person, and then the obese person.
I just had coffee with my brother, that's why I was running late.
Oh, no, that's
And,
just fine. You got here just in time.
And he's a professor of endocrinology.
Okay.
And we're just talking about a cancer app that links information for patients to an electronic health record called Cancer Aid, which looks amazing. It's being used by 20,000 people across the world, Cedars-Sinai.
Wow.
And I said, come to this lecture
Yeah.
because it'd be good for you, diabetes, blah, 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 blah. No, I've got to go. He says, why, what's SOZO? I said, SOZO. He says, why is that different to the other bioimpedance weights that are around? And I couldn't answer him.
Yeah.
So why is it different than the one you buy,
So-
from the...
So how many of you have one of those scales you step on and it gives you, that wonderful number in the morning? You're like, oh, okay, go back to sleep, right? All right, time to go out for a run. Some of you have those, right? So typically those scales use a single frequency and they run one frequency through your body. And then they use algorithms to kind of, on my scale, you can push if you're male or female, and you can push if you're like athlete or just a regular person. And in order for mine to somewhat calibrate with my SOZO, I have to push the athletic male button, and then my numbers somehow look similar to what I get on SOZO. So, it's not a great measurement, and it can really be inaccurate sometimes. So if I use the other one, my numbers are just wacky. So you have to sort of know a little bit about it, and you need something to standardize it to. So I have a lot of patients who have those, and what we do is I have them just bring it in, because they're not very big, and when I measure them, I say, okay, kind of put yourself on this. Let's find out which of the equations, some of them may have even more that you can push, but they tend to be single frequency, where the SOZO is using 256 frequencies, and they're actually plotting that on what's called a complex impedance or a cold-to-cold plot, and basically it's going from 0 to infinity. And you actually get a curve that is sort of modeled, and you can actually see if you're getting a bad measurement too. It's really cool because the scatter plot around with the normal fitted curve, it won't be correct. And so one day I hopped on my SOZO and I had my ring on still, and sure enough, the left-hand side of my body had a curve that was all wacky. And as part of when you go through your screens, you can accept or reject a test based on how that data was plotted out. So I think I really like it because when I see something, my favorite word is wonky. It just means something's off. And so when I see a wonky curve, I start thinking, oh boy, what's going on, right? And so sometimes I make sure everything was good with how I set them up for the test. And if I'm still getting that, then I start to worry about things like, tumor consolidation in that patient with metastatic breast cancer, or something else is going on that I'm not sure about. And so I think the difference is really in the superior technology of SOZO, that it's so far superior to what you can get from like a single frequency.
So the more frequencies, the better, is what you're saying?
Yeah, because you're not using an algorithm. You're actually taking a true measurement.
Gotcha.
Adam, if you can explain that, or someone can explain that any better, yeah. Yes.
Can you start to look at the distribution of body fat? Because we know that internal or visceral fat poses more health risks as opposed to fat in other areas of the body. Does it provide that breakdown?
So that's a good question. I don't think it does in terms of like trying to find that. So, they're still using, for example, if they're really concerned about a patient, they can use a CT scan or whatnot to find that. So what I think though is your visualization of a patient can usually tell some of that. I mean, you look at a patient, you can kind of see where they may be having some of that. And then if they have a SOZO, I'm having a hot flash if you haven't figured that out. My gosh, menopause is so much fun. So the humidity is like 110% in here right now. And so when you are looking at your patient, if I'm concerned about that, that may be a patient that needs further screening. And a lot of these research articles that we look at are using very expensive technologies to measure body fat in people. And if we're really looking at using this for more patients, we can't use that very expensive technology right from the get-go, because we're not using our resources widely. And there's a really great medical writer, Atul Gawande from the US, who talks a lot about that and how some of our major institutions like Mayo Clinic are doing wonderful medicine on a very good budget, and it's really critical that we don't overutilize things. And so that's one of the limiting factors when you read a lot of this research, is they talk about that'd be really nice to know, but it's really expensive to do those CT scans, and you're exposing the patient to more radiation. They've already had cancer. So I hope that kind of answered that question. It could have been a simple yes, no, but they still don't want me to send you in there yet, so I'm gonna talk. Anything else? Don't mind this. They gave you little hankies on the bridge climb thing, by the way, to wipe yourself off, but they were like attached to your thing. I should have saved mine. I use it for presentations. Good. Sure.
You were saying about the wings on your fingers. When I've been doing the SOZO with wings on, so watches and...
It could have just been the size of my hand. It was touching the conduction plate. I have little hands. And so I think just where my hand was hitting it, and as soon as I took it off, the curve was correct.
So you think it's better that we should get...
If I can get the ring off, I try to take it off, but, definitely watches and jewelry there. But it was just, from our own experience that we found if you can get the ring off. Yes.
Any other questions? Louise, do you have any comments using SOZO versus the U400 or the LDX in terms of usability?
Just from my experience so far, people love getting on it, and all you have to do is stand there.
Yeah.
And I almost feel, what am I doing? Because I don't have to switch leads and electrodes and things like that. So there's advantages in time. And it has changed the way I bring a patient into the room and do my measurement. When you're doing it for a certain way for a long time, you've got your process of doing things. So I've had to change. I do SOZO before I get the person lying down, whereas I used to lie down, do U400, then the next.
Yeah. And that's nice. I think later on I have a comment about that from one of my patients who had been involved with using my research device and also the SOZO. And she has some very nice comments for you just to kind of take back. But yeah.
What about costing it? Because this, the perception is you're just getting on this scale and it takes a few seconds, or how long does it take? Less than a minute, whereas normally you put the leads on and a lot more black magic. And and are you charging? Do we charge the same, or do we presume because it's a bigger? Do people push back on that and say, is this cheaper, or is this, or you just charge our fee and that's the end of it? I mean, is that ever an issue? Or?
Yeah, I haven't really seen that so far, but we have different issues in the U.S. with how this is. Our diffusion of innovation is affected very greatly by our healthcare system and how we bill for this. In the U.S., we have what's called the American Medical Association, and they issue codes that are then used to bill services. And despite them issuing a code, we have what are called like local coverage determinations, and these are groups of insurance companies and whatnot that then band together and say, yeah, we're not going to pay for that. We don't care if there's a code, and they can do it. It's a government-run group these different groups, and they have said in some places like they won't pay for it. So we've had a lot of challenges because of that. I certainly think my patients see a value in it, though. They've been willing, because of my ability to tell them how important this is, to fight their insurance company and write letters saying, this should have been paid for, but they're willing to pay out of cost, and it's probably a lot more than it is here potentially. I'm not really sure because I don't know a lot about the structure here for paying for it. But I've been able to sell the value to the patients, and when you see the case studies of some of the value that I've brought to people's lives, it's just unbelievable. Without this technology, I would not have been able to do it, because it was the patient's ability to see what was happening that was the driver. And it was for them to get that personalized data, which is, why I was willing to fly all the way to Australia to talk to all of you, to tell you that, because, this is really hard to do this. And I'm not having a good time here, no, having a brilliant time.
Okay, at this point,
right.
let's close off and please join us for dinner. Thank you.
All right, so we're ready. Thank you so much.